There we go. Okay, so we're going to start by talking about Lunaris. So as mentioned, my name is Tristan Kuhn. I had Shlomi's name on here too. He was the backup in case I couldn't make it today. And I work for the Digital Research Alliance in Canada. So I'll start with the kind of formal, wordy vision statement describing what Lunaris is. And so it's a national research data discovery service provided by the Alliance as one of its core research data management services. So that's kind of wordy. It has to do with research data and discovery, and I'll get into a little bit more of what that specifically means as we go along here. Kind of the key thing to understand about Lunaris is that it harvests metadata records that describe data sets that are Canadian in some sense or are hosted in Canadian data repositories and makes those metadata records available for discovery all in one place. As far as what a metadata record is it's a set of metadata that describes some data set. We don't just harvest the full data sets for Lunaris. You have to go to their source to download full data sets, but the goal is to make it possible to discover and understand what a data set might contain. So Lunaris has a bilingual interface in English and French. It was launched in full production on May 17th, 2023. Before that full production launch, it was part of FDIR as the FDIR Discovery Service, and FDIR is one of the other research data management services we'll be talking about later on. Lunaris hosts over 90,000 data sets from over 90 Canadian repositories and data collections. So we strive to index all kinds of Canadian research data that is available for access in some way. So that includes broad categories like university or other institutional repositories like Borealis, which will be talked about in some detail later, all kinds of government repositories, municipal, provincial, federal, and domain-specific repositories that host data that are specific to research disciplines of a given kind. And I'll give a special shout out to FDIR here as Lunaris's kind of sister RDM service within the Alliance, and that will be discussed in some detail in a few minutes. So we've got this graphic to kind of describe what's going on with Lunaris, and don't worry if it's kind of overwhelming. The idea here is that Lunaris has this funnel as kind of a metaphor that harvests from a wide variety of data sources that make their metadata records available in some format that Lunaris knows how to handle. So these yellow ovals in the funnel are all labeled with different types of repositories we can harvest. So Dataverse is something you might have heard of. That's kind of the back end for Borealis. This OAI PMH is the kind of feed that FDIR uses, things like that. So what we do for Lunaris is we have this piece of software called a metadata harvester, and it goes and visits all of the data sources that we index in Lunaris, and then finds all of the data sets that are available from those repositories and crosswalks the metadata records from those repositories into the format that Lunaris uses. And I'll describe crosswalking in a little bit more detail in a moment. And then given all of these harvested records, Lunaris makes them available via the Lunaris web application that's represented by this kind of laptop symbol. It provides a text and map-based search functionality that I'll talk about a little bit more later, and an OAI PMH feed, which is kind of a machine-readable representation of all of these metadata records that can be consumed by other applications. So this includes the ProQuest Central Discovery Index, through which we expose Lunaris to a number of institutional library search systems. So you might be able to find data sets that are indexed on Lunaris via your institution's library search system or catalog kind of collection system. So given all that, I just want to dive a little bit more deeply into metadata crosswalking and what that means to support the previous slide. So basically all metadata crosswalking means is translating a metadata record from some format that a data source uses into the internal format that Lunaris uses. So what kind of metadata fields are available from the source? Is there a title? Is there a description? Are there keywords? Things like that. And how are they represented at the source, and how do we represent them in Lunaris, and we make that kind of mapping or translation. An important thing to note here is that there's some metadata that Lunaris can't handle or that's been excluded from the Lunaris schema as it is. And so that metadata might be discarded. So in order to get the most full description possible of a data set of interest, you'll ultimately need to go to the data source and see how it's represented there. To go into a little bit more detail on what Lunaris's metadata schema includes, It's primarily based on the Dublin core elements that you may have heard of. And there are some elements from other schemas that we use, notably the DataCite one, and then we've added a few custom elements. So on this kind of table, or I guess it's more of a list than a table on the right, you can see a good list of the fields we use. So titles in English and French, we try to be as bilingual as possible, where it's possible based on the sources we harvest from. Things like the date of publication, the authors and their affiliations, a description of the data set. I'll go into a little bit more about the geolocation stuff, keywords, subjects, whether it's open access or whether you need to go through a request process, things like that. So all of this information is collected by Lunaris in order to make it possible to judge whether a given data set might be applicable for your use as part of a research project. Okay, so now I'm going to get into a little bit about the functionality of Lunaris and how it's used to find data sets that might be relevant to you. So when the harvester looks at a data set, one of the things it looks for is if there's any kind of geospatial data that can be treated like a bounding box that describes the location to which the data set is relevant. So is there some geospatial file in the data that defines the region to which it's applicable? Are there some coordinates in the metadata? Is there a place name that we can look up? If there are any of those things, we can use them to get a bounding box. And then Lunaris has a map search that I'll talk about in a little bit more detail later that shows all those bounding boxes and allows you to restrict your search to a region that you're interested in. Okay, and now in lieu of a live demo, I've set up some screenshots of what Lunaris looks like and the different functionality. So hopefully that will go as smoothly as possible. So this is just the Lunaris homepage. You see we've got some about, a user guide, and a big old search box. So if you search something in that search box, what you get is the search results page that looks like this. So what we've done here is typed in climate, and then there's also the kind of map search on the right side of the search results page that I've activated. And so what we've got here is an integrated text and map-based search. So in this case, broadly, what we're looking for is data sets that are related to climate in some way and are relevant to the region that I've kind of clicked and dragged and zoomed Google Maps style in this map on the right. So we've got a region that's kind of to the northwest of Calgary. And so the way this works is any data set whose bounding box falls within the window that I've shown here and is matched by the text search appears both as a pin on the map or within one of these kind of aggregating bubbles or in a long list down the center that you can scroll through. So we got something like 4,500 results from this search. And so these are all the kind of data sets that might be climate related and have some data that's relevant to the region we've selected here. And then you can go on and filter by the source repository on the left and the publication date. There are some automatic filters we've done there. But if that's not sufficient and you want to narrow down your search even further, you can use an advanced search, and I'll show now what that might look like. So clicking on this advanced button under the search button yields this page. So you can add any number of fields or any number of searches that deal with different fields. So what I've done here is added one for the publication date. So we're looking for any data set that mentions climate in its description and has been published since January 2020 now, and is still in that kind of similar region. It's not exactly the same anymore, but similar enough. And what we end up with is a more limited set of results that are have been published more recently. So instead of 4,500 or whatever we had before, now we're looking at more like 750. And almost any of the fields that I mentioned in that previous slide going over the Lunaris metadata schema can be used to narrow down your search to something that's maximally relevant to the kind of data that you're interested in using. And then once you click on a data set, you get this representation of its record as Lunaris has it. So again, things like publication dates, descriptions, authors, keywords, all of those kinds of things you might use to determine whether the data set is relevant to you. And on the right, the big yellow button takes you to the original data source to either get more information or actually access the data set itself. And you can also generate a citation from Lunaris automatically. And then finally, the kind of one instance where we go into the files of the data set and expose them to you are at the bottom of a record page for a record that includes some geospatial information. We show that information to you. So this can include things like bounding boxes. So you see a couple of them in Vancouver here. pins that point at specific coordinates on the map, and lines and polygons. So I'm not actually sure which record this was from, but this might show specific regions that a data set is relevant to. Some of them are things like census tracts that might be interesting, and those will show up nicely in this little geospatial information section. So I'm just going to wrap up. I'm already a little over time, I think. What is useful about Lunaris broadly, it's a specialized tool that improves the discoverability of Canadian research data, or tries to kind of collate Canadian research data in one place by breaking down silos between different repositories that might be well known within one discipline but not within another. Or kind of makes all government data searchable. That's the ambition, is to make all government data searchable in one place, those kinds of things. And so it's meant to be a beneficial supplement to data sources that are doing the work of hosting and exposing Canadian data by making them discoverable in kind of one place that people know about. And we're trying to create interoperability between Canadian and international data platforms by doing things like connecting to library collection systems and making Lunaris' index searchable in other contexts as well. Now we're always working toward improving Lunaris. Ongoing activities include working on the user experience by doing interviews with users and trying to make things flow as smoothly as possible. We're working on planning for better alignment with Indigenous data sovereignty principles and engaging with Indigenous communities and trying to be of service to them in whatever way we can. Expansion of the metadata harvesting capability. So taking a look at that schema and seeing under which circumstances there's metadata that's available that we're not already exposing, and exposing it. Handling more specialized disciplinary data to make it to make Lunaris as useful as possible for people who are specified or who are interested in specific disciplines. We're always looking to find and add more data sources. And specifically, we're launching a user community group to try and facilitate that engagement with Lunaris users and connect with people who we can interview to understand the user experience even better. So with that, that's about everything. We have a long list of contributors who have worked on Lunaris in the past and the present and are continuing to do good things for Lunaris. One group that's not mentioned here is the Discovery and Metadata Expert Group that deserves a special shout out for continuous feedback on Lunaris, but otherwise, thank you to everyone who's mentioned here for their ongoing work on Lunaris. And otherwise, thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions or comments, you're always welcome to contact the team at support@lunaris.ca. Thank you very much.
All right. Hello, everyone. I am Neha Milan, and I am the product lead for Federated Research Data Repository. I am quickly going to cover the basics of FORDR and then hand it over to Erin. So the Federated Research Data Repository is a bilingual, scalable, federated platform for sharing and preserving Canadian research data. The service was fully launched in February 2021 to all researchers, PIs, and librarians or their designates from Canadian post-secondary institution eligible to receive tri-agency funding. Anybody can use FORDR to search for and download data. No account is needed. But you do need an account with FORDR to deposit data. And I will be speaking to that in a few minutes. All eligible depositors will have access to a default allocation of 1 terabyte provided at no cost. Additional storage up to 10 terabytes may be provisioned as needed with some justification provided. Any request beyond that size will need to undergo a review process. So why use FORDR? The list is huge, but to mention few. We are a fully bilingual curated repository, custom built for medium to large size data sets and open to Canadian researchers in any discipline. FORDR is in production with 2 main hosting sites, Cedar at Simon Fraser University and Graham at University of Waterloo, with storage geo-replicated on disk and tape across both sites. In FORDR, you can collaborate with colleagues on new data sets and set fine-grained permissions for each collaborator. We also allow temporary embargoes on data and metadata records. And we have recently introduced a new workflow that will allow you to selectively share data with journal editors, peer reviewers, and colleagues ahead of public release when you opt in to use private for peer review functionality. Our integration with ORCID allows you to automatically add your ORCID to new deposits and also push a record of published datasets to your ORCID public profile. There's a quick snapshot of service stats on the right for your reference. So let's quickly cover collections in Fodder. The Fodder General Collection is the primary repository approved accounts. Additionally, we host specialized collections in various institutions, labs, and research groups in Canada. Although a number of collections isn't large, there is a significant diversity, and we see great potential for expansion. Today, I will highlight a few key collections. For example, the Superdan collection in Fodder includes raw data outputs from a global network of scientific radars that have been monitoring conditions in the near-Earth space environment since 1993. While the Schützman Lab collection includes data collected over 2 decades by Dr. Schützman and colleagues at McMaster University. Dr. Schützman worked with Fodder in the spring and summer of 2021 to publish research data outputs from his lab because he perceived the value in making this data available for future research purposes. We also host a number of collections for research-led labs like UBC Brain Circuits and more. These provide PIs a way to store and access data outputs by members of their lab in a central location. We are actively discussing ways to improve collection feature, including the possibility of extending our metadata schema for specialized collections and enhanced metrics for collections. So getting started is easy. First, you need to create an account. Fodder uses Globus for data transfers and managing permissions. And creating a Fodder account also sets up your Globus account if you don't have one. So visit our website, the link is here, and click Login to use an existing account or to create a new one. You can choose your institution or Compute Canada from the drop-down menu, or sign in with ORCID ID if your institution isn't listed. Alternatively, sign up with Globus using your institutional email and then return to Fodder to log in. When you first log in, you will need to complete a brief form to assist your curation team in verifying your deposit eligibility in Fodder. Remember to use the same login method each time you access Fodder. So let's talk about data deposit now. Due to time constraints, I will give a high-level overview of data deposit in Fodder. So, to start a new deposit, log in, click Submit a new data set, and choose your storage group, which could be general or special collections. Most depositors will use the general collection. You can add collaborators if you are working with other Fodder users, and you can set the permissions there. Metadata is crucial for discovery and is divided into 3 different sections on Fodder: required, recommended, and geographical. Required metadata includes title, description, research field, and license, with CC0 and CC BY recommended. We also recommend adding funder name and links out to article, code, and other related research outputs. Geographical metadata is an optional one, but will help facilitate map-based discovery of your dataset. Once you have added metadata, Now you can upload your data files either via web browser or Globus file transfer. When uploading via a web browser, you can either drag and drop files or click to choose files using the file navigator to find the file you want to upload. When you submit, you will receive a confirmation email, and our curation team will conduct an internal review. Erin Clary will be speaking to this shortly. A DOI is assigned as soon as you start a submission and is visible on your publication dashboard, but only becomes active post-curation. We advise against widely sharing the DOI until you are sure your dataset complies with our terms and is ready for publication. For urgent DOI needs related to manuscript production, contact us for a preliminary review to identify any potential publication issues. That's it from me, handing it over to Erin now. Thank you.
So I'll just walk quickly through what to expect after your dataset has been submitted, including a high-level overview of FRDR's curation, publication, and preservation processes. So new deposits in FRDR go through an internal review process called curation. Curation adds value to data by optimizing them for current use as well as for future discovery and reuse. At FRDR, curation often happens near the end of the research project. So when you're ready to share your data, and it's intended to help prepare data for publication and potentially for long-term preservation. Each new deposit is reviewed by a member of our curation team, and we use a standard workflow. We're not currently reviewing the accuracy or the veracity of the submitted data, but we can help ensure your data set is in compliance with our terms of use, and we may make recommendations to enhance the findability, the accessibility, and the reusability of your data set. We screen for potential sensitivities in the data. We offer guidance in areas such as creating documentation, properly attributing third-party data sources, licensing, file naming, preservation-friendly file formats, and so on. Our curation team is drawing on the expertise of our preservation coordinator, our data governance and ethics lead, and the rest of our team. And we're relying on the expertise of the researcher who submitted the data as well. While we may suggest or recommend changes, they need to be approved by the depositor, and we work with the depositor to implement any change. Researchers also do have the option to use the private for peer review workflow that Neha mentioned. So if you want to share data with a journal editor or colleagues for peer review ahead of public release, that workflow is available to use after the curation team has finished their internal review. The initial curation process typically takes 2 to 5 business days, and that just depends on the size of the data set, the complexity, and then as well the number of other submissions we're working on. After our recommendations are addressed and any required changes are in place, your data set will be approved and published, and FRDR will register your DOI. If you have opted to use external review, you can generate reviewer links to share with your colleagues now, and our curation team can help implement any changes that are necessitated by that peer review process. If you've not selected to use review or set a temporary embargo, your data files will be available to download from the website now, and the metadata describing your data set will be indexed for discovery. If you've linked your FRDR account to ORCID, we can push your data citation to your publication list in ORCID. We also display a recommended citation on your data landing page, and we do encourage you to cite data in any associated publication, as well as link to your data from any related research outputs. Each registered DOI in FRDR will lead to a data landing page. The top half of the landing page, which is cut off in my screenshot here, includes metadata that was added during the submission process, and that provides context to the data set and also facilitates discovery. But end users can, this is the bottom half of the landing page, so showing that end users can browse through the file set before downloading data. They can do that either using a web browser or by using Globus to transfer files to their computer or to an external server. We do append a license file to each data set, which corresponds to the license that was selected at submission. And we attach a markdown file with a complete list of dataset contents and a checksum for each file that's present. We also track dataset views and downloads, and you can access those metrics by clicking the View Item Statistics button that's at the bottom of any data landing page. Further's work to steward your dataset continues after publication. So we're providing repository storage for all data deposited in Further, and all data will undergo bit-level preservation, including checksum and file format validation, distributed storage, and backup. Selected data sets are further processed through a software called Archivematica to create archival information packages which are suitable for long-term preservation. And that selection process is known as appraisal. And appraisal actually begins during deposit and curation. So depositors can participate in the appraisal process by indicating whether they intend the data set to be preserved for the long term, and by including information about the perceived long-term value of the data in the submission form. Preservation is an active and ongoing process, and the goal here for us in a research data context is to ensure that the data remain accessible over time. And these archival information packages are maintained according to best practices in the preservation community, so their integrity will be monitored. We may migrate formats to guard against obsolescence, and the packages are replicated again across geographically distributed storage. So just a quick note about after publication. And so you know that although Further or another repository may have published your data and accepted responsibility for storing and backing up your data, you still maintain some responsibility no matter where your data reside. So transferring stewardship or long-term care of your data doesn't typically take away any of your rights or relieve you of any responsibilities related to the content you've published. You'll remain the recognized and attributed creator of the data set and the contact person for questions that may arise about your data set, unless you have named another contact person. You can reuse your data in future work. You can version your data set if necessary. But once published, your data are considered part of the scholarly record, so any changes should be made transparently. And typically, the original published item will continue to remain available. So hopefully, our rapid overview hasn't been overwhelming. There are people in place to support you. We recommend reaching out to your library early on for support with data management planning. Preparing a data management plan can help ensure that you've thought about standards, open file formats, your active and repository storage options, potential sensitivities, and so on. You're also welcome to contact Further ahead of deposit if you have questions about preparing your data, or if you'd like to consult on whether we're an appropriate fit for your data. So we're here to support you before, during, and after data publication. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. And quickly, I know we're running out of time, but before we end, just a few notes on upcoming features. We're working on a new versioning feature, which has traditionally been a bit tricky in Further just given the size of many of our deposits. So if you happen upon a version item in Further, we're currently displaying all the information on one data landing page and trying to filter out or restructure so that superseded files are the first thing that people see. But we're making updates that'll allow us to present those on their own landing page. We're also working on improvements to make download easier. So if you're not using Globus right now or having to sort of download files one at a time through the web browser, this new feature will allow you to select a subset of files or folders that you'd like to access via the web browser, and Further will zip these up and just give you a link to download them all at once. We're also participating in the Alliance-led Controlled Access Management Initiative. So we've developed a zero-knowledge encryption solution, but because managing sensitive research data across jurisdictions can be so complex, it involves various regulatory and institutional review functions. We'll be participating in this initiative to help ensure that our service offering, our policies and workflows are aligned well with institutional policies and practices, and that they're suiting researcher needs. So all of those things to look forward to in the future. We've added a few links to the slide deck, and we'll share the slides afterwards. with some resources that might be useful as you're getting started and thinking about data sharing or preparing data for deposit in a repository, be that Furtr or your institutional Borealis repository or another repository option. So we'll share those slides, and we're holding questions to the end. So I'll pass things over to Megan, who will tell you some more about Borealis as another repository option for you.
So hi, everyone. I'm Megan Goodchild. I'm the Research Data Management Librarian at Queen's University and at Borealis. I'm so pleased to be here to give you an update about Borealis and a quick introduction as well. So just to give you a big overview, Borealis is a bilingual, multidisciplinary, secure Canadian research data repository. It's supported by academic libraries and research institutions across Canada. Borealis is a shared service provided in partnership with Canadian Regional Academic Library Consortia. So that includes COPL, OACL, PayBook, and CALL, and also the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. Borealis is based on the open source Dataverse software, and the technical infrastructure is hosted by Scholars Portal and the University of Toronto Libraries. All data and files are securely stored in the Ontario Library Research Cloud, or OLRC, and institutions can leverage single sign-on through CANARI's Canadian Access Federation. Datasets are indexed for discoverability in tools like DataCite Search, Google Dataset Search, and also we heard about Lunaris today as well. So that's just a quick overview. We have now 70 subscribing institutions across Canada in the service. So we really have representation from coast to coast and also to coast in the north as well, which we're really excited to see just the continuing expansion of involving nature of the service. It's also fun to add all these pins on the map. In terms of metrics, as I said, we have 70 participating institutions. We have over 19,000 published data sets. Over 360,000 uploaded files and over 16 million downloads. Since it's Love Data Week, it's always fun to have data visualizations. This is one of the cumulative deposits over time since the service began as Scholars Portal Dataverse in 2012. And you can see it's almost exponential in shape. This is really true across Canada. Researchers are really producing unprecedented amounts of research data. A number of drivers are causing that, including national and international RDM policies, journal policies, community and disciplinary organizations, and open science mandates and open sharing. So it's really exciting to see these drivers. So why would you maybe decide to deposit in a repository like Furtr or Borealis? There are a number of ways that we've seen researchers share in the past. Sharing data by request has many downfalls, as we're all aware of. How do you discover those data sets? Where are those data sets stored? Is it on a hard drive on your desk? How do you transfer? How can you cite people? Those kinds of things. We also, there's a recent study in Nature that found about only 7% of authors actually shared their data by request. So it's really not a viable solution. Personal websites, as we know, are very ephemeral. And data that's shared as part of journal supplementary material is really not easily discoverable and can be hidden behind paywalls. So depositing in a repository is really a best practice and can help make your data fair. So that's findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. As well, repositories offer long-term stewardship of the data long after the project has been completed. So let's look at some of the features of Borealis that also help make your data fair as well. One thing that differentiates Borealis from other repositories is that it really provides sort of the best of both worlds. It's national infrastructure and you can benefit from a national community, but at the same time, researchers benefit from local institutional RDM support services and a dedicated institutional repository collection. And we'll talk more in a moment about how institutional administrators really customize their collections and provide local support in the following slides. To help with some terminology, the repository is really organized by collections, which is really just a container for data sets and other sub-collections. Each institution has sort of a top-level collection, and data sets are deposited into these collections or sometimes in sub-collections based on their affiliation. You really should check with your institutional administrator to learn more about how they organize their collection. The Borealis homepage is also called the Root Collection. Here you can find a carousel that lists the various institutional collections. And when you're on campus and at a partner institution, you should see your institution in the first spot in the carousel. Here you can also find links to the user guide, recently deposited data sets and collections. There's a search tool and much more. So I invite you to explore that. Institutional collections are administered by university libraries or sometimes support units on campus. Researchers deposit into the institutional collection based on their affiliation, as I said. You can see that institutions really customize their collection with branding, contact information, featured sub-collections, descriptions and documentation about their curation and support practices, and really instructions for how to deposit data. So be sure to read the information about how institutional administrators manage their collection before trying to deposit. And also I've highlighted the red box here, the contact. This is the best place to contact your administrators to ask questions. Some institutions will set up sub-collections for faculty members or research groups to bring together related data sets. And they might also provide specialized training for research groups or researchers to help curate and manage on their own potentially. So again, reach out to your institutional administrators to ask about that. Increasingly, researchers are collaborating across institutions and organizations. And so Borealis now supports what we're calling sponsored discipline-specific collections that are affiliated with one or more institutions. These collections are often not nested under a specific institution, but are found under the Root Collection, and they can support a number of different use cases from journal archiving, just digitization projects and things like that. So reach out again to learn more about those kinds of collections. So let's look more closely at data sets and files. Borealis data sets are logical packages that include data files, documentation, and code with descriptive metadata. And this should really support independent understanding of the data to promote reuse. Descriptive metadata can be added at the data set and file levels, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So all file formats are accepted. You can upload files through the browser or through the APIs. And we have up to 5 gigabytes per file or up to 1,000 files per upload. As part of our preservation plan, upon upload, an MD5 checksum is calculated, and then we monitor that for fixity assurance, which helps to protect against the loss of data in the form of corruption over time and things like that. You can add additional metadata and things like tags to differentiate the different types of files like documentation and data, and that just helps users to navigate. There are really fantastic options for rich metadata description. There are mandatory and optional fields in the citation metadata. This includes your ability to add an ORCID if you have one. There's also optional disciplinary metadata for a number of fields or areas, and you can see those as citation blocks. Borealis also extracts file level metadata upon upload, things like file type, and we can also export metadata in a number of standards. You might be already hearing that you need a DOI, a digital object identifier, for your data to include in a publication, and Borealis automatically reserves a DOI through DataCite Canada when you create a data set. The DOI won't resolve until the data set's published. So you can see the data citations automatically created. It's in this big blue box, including the DOI. And if you include that in your publication, it helps to really cross-link your research outputs. Borealis allows you to manage access at various levels, collection, data set, and file level. So you can assign varying permissions for collaborators and also have the ability to add granular file level permissions. You can outline specific terms of access in the metadata and also enable the option for users to request access to files. We also have the ability to set automatic file embargoes by entering a certain date when the data should become available. Versioning is a super important feature for research data management, where files or data are updated over time. So Borealis provides useful versioning control. It's used to track metadata and file changes once the data set has been published. And these are also reflected in the data citation as well. The versions tab allows you to compare the different versions, and you can see what changes have been made and by who. The CC0 public domain dedication is the default for the repository. This sort of facilitates reuse, but you're also able to select other Creative Commons licenses really easily as soon as you have the dataset creation page. And then you can also add your own custom terms of use if needed as well. And we have some examples of those in our documentation. This was a highly requested feature. It's the private URL. It provides direct access to unpublished data sets without the need to log in. There's also the ability to create a private URL for anonymized access, which withholds certain metadata fields like author and contact, so you can do a blind peer review. We have file previewers, which are a really great way to preview the files in the browser without downloading. So if the files are restricted, you would need to have access to those files to preview them. There's a whole number of fantastic file previewers that are listed on the page there. Some new ones this year. In the past year, we have enabled zip archive previewers, as well as electronic NAB notebooks, so things like Jupyter notebooks, and also NetCDF and HDF5 files. The Data Explorer tool is another really great tool that allows you to explore tabular data like SPSS and Excel right in the browser. You can also do things like look at summary statistics and cross tabulations, and even download a subset of the variables for further analysis. So I've just given you a ton of really great features. We recommend trying them out on our demo repository. It's a separate platform that's used as a sandbox to try things out. You can create an account by clicking on the login button, and we invite you to try it out. It's open to anybody to use. Just looking at some new features that are coming up. The Dataverse software is being developed now with an API-first approach. So we are seeing more APIs to be able to conduct specific tasks without using the graphical user interface. And so there's more possibility for doing things like scripting actions, to be doing things programmatically. And because of these APIs, we are seeing more and more integrations, which are really exciting. One recent one is the GitHub integration, which allows users to upload or transfer things in your GitHub repository into a Borealis data set, which is a really exciting way to kind of archive those kinds of things as well. We also have another number of ongoing initiatives. We're working on 2 projects to improve infrastructure and collaboratively develop policy frameworks to improve sensitive data deposit and sharing. So one of those was mentioned by Aaron, the CAM project, and we're also working on another one with the University of Toronto. In response to ongoing feedback from the community, we're also participating in the development of the integration between Dataverse and Globus. This is an external transfer tool to facilitate large file transfers for upload and download. So stay tuned for more details about those projects. For more details about this service, we invite you to check out our policies and documentation, including our terms of use and things like that. So when we share the slides, feel free to check those out. And these are a list of resources that can help you get started on your Borealis journey. Includes links to our production site, demo site, documentation like our user guides and best practices, and some other resources that might be helpful to you, including API support. So if you have any questions or feedback about Borealis, please feel free to reach out to our team. It's at the contact form, which I'll put in the chat. And then we also invite you to find your local RDM specialist or librarian for questions about deposit and curation into their institutional collections by going to the partners link. And we're happy to help facilitate the connections as well. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope there's still some time for questions as well.